Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to, make sure that you are in the right workshop. This is called Niche, Cultivating the Space for Women with Marie Joy Pring. And let me introduce Professor Joy. We know her as Professor Joy here at APNTS. But let me read her biography to you. Marie Joy Pring is an adjunct professor here at APNTS, teaching courses on research and theology. And I have to tell you, I would have never finished my dissertation if she had not helped me. She is amazing. Aside from being a faculty here at APNTS, Professor Joy works full-time at the Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture, which is called ISACC. She's the Chief Operating Officer, and she's the head of training and education projects for ISACC. She's also the pastor of the Church of the Triumphant Christ Central. In 2019, she led a study with the Nazarene Compassionate Ministry International Justice Mission and Holistic Transformation Resource Center on effective aftercare interventions for victim survivors of online sexual exploitation of children. In 2020, Professor Joy was one of the research consultants for the ISACC International New York on a study in 14 countries about disrupting online harm for children. This research was in partnership with UNICEF and Interpol. At present, Professor Joy is one of Langham United Kingdom's scholars in Asia, and she is in the process of completing her dissertation for the degree of the Doctorate of Philosophy and Transformational Development here at APNTS. Wow. So she is a lot smarter than I am, and she's very well accomplished. So we are very honored that she will be our workshop teaching us this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Professor Joy.
Thank you, Prof. Eileen, or as we all know her, she's Princess, no? She's the rightful owner of the title Princess at APNTS. So thank you so much. Please don't be, how do I say this? I'm a learner like you. Maybe let's put it that way. And I've always seen like everyone at the same space, everyone at the same plane. We are all learning. And I'm so happy that we will learn together this afternoon. So my presentation is, or our workshops, I was thinking half of the time I'll be sharing, and then the rest of the time that we have together until 2:45. Am I right, Princess?
Yes, and yeah, you could go after whatever we have until 3, so you're good.
Okay. All right, but I really want most of the time to be given to you as participants in breakout rooms, so you can think about your own context, your own church, because I've attended and I have conducted also webinars and seminars and workshops, and at the end of the day, you really just want the people to leave with something practical, with something that they can use in their own church. So, as Professor Eileen has said, this is niche, and we want to talk about cultivating the space for women to flourish as transformative agents of God's kingdom. So it's a mouthful, but I promise you at the end of this webinar or this workshop, online workshop that we have, we will be at least thinking through these major concepts: space and women as transformative agents of God's kingdom. So these are the two most important keywords here: space and transformative agents, women as transformative agents. So I'm a stickler for roadmap. I don't want to go babble without you knowing where we are going. So at least this is what we want to talk about this morning. So rather this afternoon. So we will talk about women in the church. Let's look at the women then and now. Let's look at the statistical data today. Let's look at the early church history. And as I've mentioned in the description for this workshop, we don't want to forget to drink from our own heritage, from the fountain of our own heritage, the Wesleyan Holiness women. So I've always talked about these 3 women that I'll introduce to you this afternoon. Nonetheless, I want us to remember them, get to know their names, and see what they have done. And then the second part, I think, is really what will be the meat of our discussion, or at least my sharing. Moving our women from silence to transformative power. So I've always seen power as a movement, no, not a movement of people banding together. No, I mean movement, moving from a certain place to a certain place. And we need to help the women move or transition in that way from silence or being just beautiful wallflowers to transformative active agents, no, for God's kingdom. And then we'll go to the breakout room, as I have mentioned a while ago, and we will try to think about the Esther space. So we have a lot of things going on. We have data, church history, Wesleyan Holiness history. We have actually this silence to transformative power is not my own framework. I'm building from Belenki and her team, who talked about or thought about women's ways of knowing. And I realized that this framework can be transformed or can be translated or can also be transplanted in the way that we deal with the women in our churches, with contextualization, of course. So just a brief thing from the Philippines. I know we have friends from Indonesia. I've seen an Indonesian friend here. I've seen Ro, who is my friend and classmate from Myanmar. I know that we are all nations, but at least this is what's happening in the Philippines. We are experiencing breakthroughs for and by women, no? Just this year alone. In fact, in a quarter, I believe in a quarter, just this quarter, we've won our very first gold medal in the Olympics by a woman in a very unconventional category for a Filipino woman, which is weightlifting. She's Heidelin Diaz. First ever, after 90 years of joining the Olympics, we now have our first ever gold medal and our first ever Nobel Peace Prize. We just celebrated that yesterday. Yes, Maria Ressa, she is a journalist. So irregardless of where you stand politically, I think we can all agree that, well, she's the first woman who ever got the Nobel Peace Prize, and we cannot contend with that. She's acknowledged, even if her own people will not acknowledge. I just seen a post that how can a Nobel Peace Prize be given to a noisy woman? So her voice is noise to others who do not want to hear her. But I think we can all agree, as I've said, regardless of where you are politically, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is a breakthrough for the Filipino people and for women. So at least this is where we are now. But I'm wondering, is this breakthrough also happening in churches? The Church of the Nazarene have been really a safe space for women in ministry, for women to, for me, myself, APNTS has been my safe space. APNTS has acknowledged my ability or my gifts to pastor even before my own home church has. So I would really give that to the Nazarene Church, that you are in many ways forerunners in advocating for women in ministry. But we want to think and we want to really be critical. Is that, I mean, how real is that? How true is that? Even in even in all churches, we have, or at least I may say that the Church of the Nazarene has your woman general superintendent, correct, Princess? Dr. Sandberg. And I think that's beautiful. But I wonder, is that reality the same for women in local churches? So I hope that we can think about that today. And you think about your very own church today, and where are the women in your church, and how do we help them, and how do we really spur them to reach their potential as leaders for God's kingdom? So just some data. Women are universally more religious than men across all societies, cultures, and faith. We have men leaders here, Pastor Dan, Brother Ro. So with all due respect, this is not my words. These are the words of Stark and Beit Halami, the researchers. Now they have come up with this conclusion that women are universally more religious than men. And when we say religious, it cuts across all religion. You talk about Islam, you talk about Buddhism, you talk about Shintoism, you talk about other religions. There are more women than men. The greater religiosity of women demonstrated in consistent research findings over past 100 years is one of the most important facts about religion. That's according to Beit Halami, 2014. It's an important fact. The question is, are we paying attention to this fact as churches? And are we leveraging the truth that there are more women than men in the church? I have heard a pastor say, at least not from the Church of the Nazarene, thank God, but I have heard a pastor say, I don't think I will let a woman preach in our pulpit. And I ask why. They already have all the ministries. They have visitation ministries. They have Sunday school ministries. They have whatnot ministries. We cannot give them the pulpit. And I just smiled. Of course, it wasn't the avenue to debate. But in my head, I was thinking that there's truly something wrong here. There's truly something wrong here. Someone is not listening, or at least a group of leaders are not listening to the reality of their church. So by the numbers, 53%, think about that, according to the surveys conducted between 2008 to 2015. So this is a longitudinal study. So this is not just a reality of 1 year. This is a reality of a longitudinal study, 2008 to 2015, almost 10 years. The Pew Research Center has gathered data from 84 countries, and what they have found out, not aggregated data, is that there are 53% of regular weekly attendees that are females. So I think this really just, the Pew Research finding really just confirms what Stark and Beit Halami has been saying, that there are more women in our religion, especially in Christianity, than men. So we need to grapple with that fact. As I've said, we will look at Wesleyan Holiness women, so, and what they have been doing in ministry. So some example of this exemplary women who have occupied the space in their church, and not just the space in their church, but they have widened the space. If I may use the prayer of Jabez words, they have extended the pegs of the tents of the church through their ministry work. Catherine Booth, many of us in the whole Wesleyan Holiness tradition would know her as the wife of William Booth, who is they are the leaders of the Salvation Army. And this is a story that not everyone knows, that when William Booth was about to give up in the ministry, it was Catherine Booth who pushed forward for Salvation Army. And now there are just more than, there are hundreds of Salvation Army ministries worldwide. And at least in the Philippines, we can say that we can never overexpress our thanks for Salvation Army, and all over the world, actually. And we all know that their ministry principle, or their ministry tagline, or their motto is very simple, right? So, soup, soap, and soul. So all thanks to William Booth, and of course to Catherine Booth, who has been with him and who has been pushing this ministry, this movement worldwide forward. Not many of you know, or not many of us know, I have just learned this recently, that there are a lot of development organizations doing relief all over the world that have been born out of Salvation Army. So they have truly extended their tent, not just during her time, but even until today. We benefit from the work of this woman, Catherine Booth. We also have Amanda Berry Smith, from our Wesleyan Holiness tradition, who is a breakthrough in herself, by herself, as the first Black female international evangelist. She traveled from the States to Europe, talking about slavery, talking about how Black people, the African American people, need education and advocating for it. She was a missionary. So she was a cutting edge during her time. And she has, of course, her family has history of slavery, but she broke through that. She enlarged that space, no, that she has in order to help others and help more. She is many ways a champion of a Wesleyan value, that's renewed spirit of mission, that renewed spirit of mission. No, I think about Amanda Berry Smith. We have amazing figures, male figures, but I think it's also good to remember this afternoon that we do have Amanda Berry Smith as our a figure of leader in missions and evangelism. And then you have Emma Whittemore, again from Wesleyan Holiness tradition. Holiness, Pentecostal, more on the Pentecostal spectrum, more on the Pentecostal slate. She is the founder of the Doors of Hope. And even before we have international justice missions, before we have Nazarene Compassionate Ministry, Doors of Hope have been the leaders in helping trafficked women, in helping women in sex slave, taking them out of that space, no, and bringing them into redemption, into freedom, teaching them alternative ways to earn income. And Doors of Hope, before she died, was about 240 all over the States. And there have been some data that says that it has even, gone from the States to other countries. So these are the women in the Wesleyan Holiness tradition. When you think about transformative agents in the society for God's kingdom, we are not empty-handed. We have these women who have set the path forward that we can think about, we can follow. And I hope that after this, after our time this afternoon, you get to know them more, read about them more. I'm happy to share that I've learned about them at APNTS. So those who have access, no, you can read about them, you can learn more about them, and hopefully when we think about ways and framework of building leadership and ministry for women in our church, we can think about them. We can build from what they have already done. We don't have to invent new torches. We can carry the torch that they've carried forward. If anything, I hope that reminds us. But let me take even a step back. So I'm showing you the truth today. 53% of the attendees in your church there are more women than men, and that cuts across cultures, that cuts across time. No, I've shown you that it's a longitudinal study that they have done, your research has done. But that's not a modern reality. When you step back and go to the early church, you would realize that even from the shepherd of her mass, no, this is an ancient early church document, women have outnumbered men in church. And they have courageously shared the burden of working for the church in a time where being a Christian is difficult and life-threatening, no, in the Roman Empire. So you have women who have been setting the bar really high. Devout Christian women of the early church focus on ministering to others. So their work is fully on compassionate work, on social work. When we think about early church, it's really gendered, no? You think about early church fathers. That's what I also have taken, a course that I've also taken. But actually, if you just take time to read and just take time to really dig through historical data, you will realize that the microscope was on the lens of the microscope is on that particular reality. You have men who are leading the church. But if you use another way to see things, maybe you use a telescope rather than a microscope, you will see that women have been around and doing works for widows, for orphans, for the poor, for the sick. They have taken the gospel seriously. They have taken the mandate of Jesus seriously, to go to the widows, to go to the orphans, to proclaim liberty and freedom for the poor and the sick. They are the ones who really took that Christological mandate on their back and moved forward. So their ministries included visiting the poor in their humble cottages, providing meals for the widows and orphans, tending to those who are with grave illness. They're also you think about the frontliners today who exposed themselves to COVID, the women of the early church would do that. They don't have vaccines, they don't have any medical protection, but they go to those who are gravely sick and they pray for them. They sit with those dying people on the bedside and pray for them. They would hold their hands before they die. So this is the legacy of women in the church that I hope we get to speak about in the pulpit more, or get to share in the Bible studies more. They've shown hospitality to missionaries in transit. They've served and comfort imprisoned martyrs who are awaiting execution. That's from Tertullian, no, ad Oxorem. That's from Tertullian. So they have shown selflessness. They have given sacrifices, not just to the church, but to the whole society that they belong to. And so Chadwick, church historian, would say that the action, the social message, the social action done by women of the early church is the most potent single cause of Christian success. So we all know that the church, no, it's spread throughout the world. But if you take a step back, you would realize that women are the ones who really pushed for this. And even Chadwick, a church historian, would acknowledge that if you would identify a single factor that caused for Christianity to move from town to town, from cities to cities, from countries to countries, you should never ever discount the strong participation of women who are doing the ministry on the ground. The longer that I study, I've been in the seminary for 9 years now. I think APNTS is already tired of me, but I've been in the seminary for 9 years now. I've been studying theology for 9 years now, and the deeper I study theology, the more I study theology, the more I realize that our doctrines are good, and doctrines must always be true and right, but doctrines are not the ones that transform people. Doctrines are not the ones who bring people to Christ. They strengthen people in Christ, but doctrines are not the one that lead them to Christ. It's our actions. It's acts of compassion that really transform, that really turn them to Christ, the acts of mercies. And women have been leading in this way. I hope we listen more to them historically, these voices of the women. So I think we need to grapple with the question, no? Are women in your church just for filling up the pew, or are we willing and ready to let them fill spaces of power? Are women in your churches just for filling up the pew, or are we willing and ready, so 2 words, willing and ready, to let them fill spaces of power? I hope we are on the latter part. So as I've said, I'll share with you 5 types of women that could be in your church, or maybe they're all in your church. Maybe most of them are in your church. And this is developed from Belenki et al., Women's Ways of Knowing. And as I shared, this can really be translated into your church too. So for the first group of women, I call them the silent women. No? These are women who are used to being disenfranchised and abused. They are isolated, they are fearful, they have infirm sense of self-worth, and they are at risk of never being heard, being shamed, and being blamed. So when you think about your church, I think it's good to ask God to give you a certain kind of lens that you will identify the silent women. And the silent women, they're not the ones that are typically on the corner. Maybe you have a jolly face, a jolly face, but inside her, no, there's a silent woman inside. So you have to identify and know the silent women, and it takes time and relationship to really get to know them, to really know that she may be a strong woman at the surface, but when you look deep inside, then there's that problem there. And so it's easy for these women to fall into the cracks, to even not be heard in their time in the church. But it's up to us, the ministers who know, to really take time and get to to be sensitive and pray and ask the Lord to reveal to us who are the silent women in our churches. It's dangerous because there are gifts inside her that needs to be used for God, but also dangerous because then the power of the gospel is not fully expressed in their lives, right? And so we want to move them. We want to help them move from the silent space to hopefully an empowered space. But as I've shared, this is a spectrum. There are 5 types of women from Belenki et al. That might be in our churches. The second is the impressionable woman or the impressionable women in your church. They perceive authorities in their lives as the sole source of single truth. And learning is only possible through listening and receiving information from from authority. So that's how they see themselves. They are just cups ready or wanting or waiting to be filled. And that's not healthy. So they have come out of silence, but they're just cups. Yeah, I remember if you're familiar with Paulo Freire, now the banking method, they think that they're just cups willing to they're waiting to be filled, but that's not our design. No, they have difficulty sifting knowledge and constructing their own original work or original thought, and we don't want to live our women like that. In a place where the leaders are threatened with the ability of women, in a place where there is selfish leadership, this would be a good setup to have impressionable women. These are your women ready to follow the order of the pastor in one go. And many Filipino women are like this, no? Or maybe I won't say that many. I will just say that in our church, most of women are like this. But we cannot leave them like this. We want to move them forward, as I've said, into a place where they are empowered, where they can build new things for God, create new things for God, and transform themselves and others in the process for God. And the third type of women, this is a spectrum, the third type of women are the subjective women. Now, these are the women who have been released from silence, who have been released from being impressionable. But now the problem is they only know how to listen to their own voice, and they only know how to acknowledge that their first-hand knowledge and their experiences are the ultimate authority. This is still a dangerous space, a dangerous place to be. Not just for women, but for anyone to be, to just be insulated, to be in an echo chamber, or to operate in silos. That's not what we want for our women. So I wanted to invite you and look at the next part of the spectrum, which is the connected women. Now we see things getting better here. The connected women, or the connected woman, knows the importance of listening to reason. She knows how to reach out to understand others. And empathy is the value of this woman, or the type of this connected women. So now we're seeing better movement from silence to being impressionable, to being subjective, now to being a connected woman. But we don't stop here. What we want our women of our church to be, we want them to be constructive women. So this is a notch higher, according to Belenki et al. Love Guthrie. No, this is the place where we want to bring our women. For more than empathy, these women know compassion. No, and it is the core of what they do. These are constructive women who knows how to integrate her voice and the voice of others, and ultimately, of course, the voice of God. And she herself, because she knows how to pull these things together, she becomes the host, no, of a thriving community. Her life, her heart, the works of her hands now become the host of a thriving community. This is where we want to bring our women, from silence to impressionability, to being subjective, to this good place, connected women. No, we want to bring them to become constructive women. Again, this is taken from the 5 ways of knowing of women. So, in conclusion, I want to challenge you to think about cultivating the space for these women. From silence, how do we move them to courage, to compassion, to thinking about community, No, when I was preparing for our time together, I was reminded of Esther, and I think she can be our biblical, no, our biblical basis if we want to create a framework for cultivating the space for women to be transformative agents. No, there are certainly women in your church who are like Esther, who are ready to rise to the occasion of leadership. They may be in silent mode now. They may be in impressionable mode now. Sometimes they may be in subjective mode, and or they are in a good place, like the connected mode. We want to bring them to the constructive mode. I'd say creative, which is also the same thing. Constructive mode. No, women who will say, like Esther, that if I perish, I perish. This is not a fatalistic. This is not a fatalistic speech. This is a courageous speech. This is her saying, I will do what God wants me to do, and I'm willing to take the consequences. No, so this is not just fatalism. This is actually faith. If I perish, I perish. This is boldness. This is courage. No? Beautiful, gentle, but strong boldness and courage of women. And they're ready to move from this empowering silence to become transformative leaders. So I remember the words of Mordecai to Esther. No? For if we remain silent at this time, if we leave our women in silence at this time, no, relief and deliverance will still come from other women, from other places in the church, or even sometimes from other parts of the community. Just a quick story. In the Philippines, you all know that we have the hardest and the strictest lockdown. If you don't know that, let me share that with you now. Until now, we are in a certain category of community quarantine, and people are dying. It's not an exaggeration. When you go to the slums in Metro Manila, near the Bay Area, you would know that people are dying. And they don't die like drop dead just like that. They die because of malnutrition. They die because they don't have food to eat. And sustained malnutrition, weeks to weeks, months to months, will really just put your health in danger. And that's a slow death, no? That's a slow death. So think about us. We are in lockdown since March 2020. Now it's October 2021. People are slowly dying in the Philippines. And there's this courageous woman. She's not even from the church. Courageous woman who just brought out a cart of bamboo filled with sardines, with noodles, with alcohol, with wipes. And she just put the sign there, take what you need, give what you have. So it's like it's a community pantry thing. And people are saying that, oh, that's very Marxist. Well, Marx have mentioned that, but if you take a step back, it's actually from Acts, when the believers pooled their resources together. So when I was looking at that, this is an Esther moment. This is a woman rising up to the occasion, leading and becoming a transformative agent. And before you know it, in months' time, that community pantry thing became a rapid fire movement in the Philippines. There have even been community pantries in Laos, and they created a banner inspired by the community pantry of the Philippines. So you see, people catch on transformation. People know how to recognize compassion. It's just for me, I'm quite dumbfounded that it did not come from the church. So going back to Esther, going back to the words of Mordecai to Esther, the Lord will deliver his people. The Lord will bring food to the hungry. The Lord will bring the message of hope to the desperate, to the needy, in whatever way that the Lord can. But the question is, are you ready to raise your women so that when God would look for tools, when God would look for people to use, for people to fill with his Holy Spirit so that they can do the work, your church is ready. Your church have placed them in a position to become God's hands and feet at this time. I hope that the Lord will not resort to another place. I hope that the Lord will see your church and say, okay, Church of the Nazarene Bacolod, there is Rolly Bell there. I will use Rolly Bell. Oh, Church of the Nazarene Antipolo, I can see Erica. She's ready. Hands and feet, heart and mind. I hope we can cultivate the spaces for women to do ministries and works of transformation. How do we do that? I think we can think of these questions, no, from silence to power. We can move them from silence to power. We can ask these four crucial questions. First, we need to recognize what causes silence in the women of your church. Diagnostic first, no, diagnosing the problem. They have leaders who are threatened with women voices. Do you have, or maybe the leader is supportive, but there's just no space. So maybe you think about that. What causes the silence in the women of your church? Or maybe there's a growing problem of domestic abuse in your church that hopefully you're not just sweeping that under the rug. Hopefully you're just unaware of it, but you really need to think about this too. And then the next question, I think, is we need to identify the Mordecais who can be the advocate for women of your church. So what causes their silence? As for Esther, it's her being a foreigner, no? Even if she was the queen, no? And I'm sure she has fears because of Vashti being banished, no? So you have to identify what causes the fear, address that fear, and you have to know who are the ones who can help them move from fear to courage, from silence to empowerment, and then perhaps what are the tools and platforms that women in your church can use. They don't have to be new platforms or new tools. Maybe you have to ask indigenous ways on how they gather together, unique ways on how they gather together. So for instance, I know of a church whose women, they just huddled together. And I'm sure this is also true with other church, but this particular church, the pastor noticed that the women really just love to cook. They're very intimidated to lead Bible studies and all that. But the women there really just love to cook. And this pastor have created a community kitchen, no? And they were able to feed the community near their church for 1 year because the women would just pull their resources together. Well, they have had some help also coming from the outside. And this is the powerful ministry of the women. And when you go to their community, the women will say, or the people will say that they survived the harshest part of the COVID lockdown because this church gave them food. So what tools, what platforms can your women use? And if you want them to later on share in the leadership, not take over, okay? We are not usurpers. we bring in our unique gifts and our unique framework to strengthen and enrich the leadership. So you have to think what platforms are available and what can be given, what can be built, tools and platforms for them. And then this is a sustainability question, no? How can we sustain this growth that we want the women to have? So, okay, you know the tool, you know the people who can help them, but then how do we make sure that they truly grow in their character and leadership? So I think this is now the time that we break out into rooms, Princess. What advice? Wow, I'm also growing. So I think I can share. It's important to find mentors. That's one. Mentors who will encourage you. Of course, I would say God's word, but that's too churchy. We all know that God's word will help us to be courageous. But let me give you some practical things. You really need a mentor. And sometimes that mentor do not have to be someone who's older than you, but someone who is a peer who can encourage you to speak more. And in Filipino, we have the word padayon. No, not Filipino, in Visaya, we have the word padayon, which just means move forward. And I feel like as we grow, as women who grow from silence to empowerment, I think our mindset should just be padayon. Just move forward, speak more, be confident more, and know that you will always have people who will try to put their hands on your mouth, who will shame you and who will say, maybe you don't know, so shut up. No, but don't stop. There will be people like that. There will be people like that, and they will say it even in a kind way. But you have to recognize, no, where is this criticism coming from? Is this a very honest criticism that wants me to grow, or is this a criticism because this person is uncomfortable having a woman's opinion on the table? So I think that's one. Just move. Well, first, find a mentor or a peer who will keep the fire burning, who will help you, who will pray for you, who will encourage you to speak more, and then padayon, keep moving forward, keep speaking. You begin in small spaces. If you're a mother, you begin by taking ownership of speaking life, speaking instructions to your children. If you are a leader in a cell group of 2 or 3 people or 5 people, go ahead, take that space, speak to their lives, be confident that you, God placed you there with compassion and with His help, no, with the help, of course, of your personal growth in the Word, to nourish and build these women. And God is faithful. When you have something to say, God will give you the platform. God will enlarge your platform to be that constructive woman who will be that space of growth for others. So I hope that helps. Have your mentor and push forward, move forward with God's word and with confidence.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.